What is nihilism, really? Nihilism is often explained with a very short sentence, usually something like, "Nothing matters," but this sentence is too small to carry what nihilism actually means. Nihilism is not simply about being sad, angry, or hopeless, and it is not just a dark mood or a bad attitude toward life. Nihilism is a way of thinking that begins when people start to question where meaning comes from and whether that meaning is real or only something we learn to believe. The word itself comes from the Latin word nihil, which means nothing, but nihilism does not say that the world is empty or that life does not exist. Instead, it asks a quieter question: does life have a built-in purpose, or do humans only imagine that it does? For most of history, people did not ask this question very often because meaning felt stable and solid. Life had a clear structure. Religion explained why humans existed. Traditions explained how to live. Communities explained what was right and wrong. Meaning did not feel personal, it felt inherited. People were born into a world where answers already existed, and most of the time those answers were enough. Nihilism begins to appear when those answers stop feeling convincing, when people notice that beliefs change depending on place, culture, or time, and when ideas that once felt eternal begin to look temporary. When someone realizes that rules and values are not the same everywhere, it becomes harder to believe that they come from a single, unchanging source. Nihilism grows out of this realization. It does not arrive suddenly. It develops slowly, often without a clear moment of arrival. A person might still live normally, go to work, talk to friends, and follow routines, yet feel that something underneath all of it has become weaker. Goals that once felt important begin to feel optional. Traditions that once felt sacred begin to feel negotiable. Nihilism is present when a person asks why and no longer feels satisfied with familiar answers. This does not mean the person wants life to be meaningless, it means they no longer accept meaning simply because it has been handed to them. Nihilism is not a rejection of life itself but a rejection of automatic meaning. Many people misunderstand nihilism because they confuse it with despair. Despair is emotional. Nihilism is intellectual. A nihilist does not necessarily feel miserable, they feel uncertain. They notice that many things people treat as absolute are actually fragile. Laws change. Moral rules evolve. Social values rise and fall. What one generation treats as sacred, another may ignore. Nihilism asks what this says about meaning itself. If meaning depends so much on context, then perhaps it is not written into the universe but created by humans. This thought can feel uncomfortable because it removes guarantees. It suggests that life does not come with instructions. It suggests that meaning is not something waiting to be discovered but something that must be formed, chosen, or questioned. For many people, this idea feels dangerous. It feels safer to believe that life already has a purpose, even if that purpose is unclear. Nihilism removes that safety. It leaves a space where certainty used to be. This is why nihilism is often described as a crisis. But a crisis does not have to be destructive. A crisis can also be a moment of clarity. Nihilism appears most strongly in periods of change, when old systems weaken and new ones have not yet taken their place. Scientific discoveries challenge religious explanations. Technology changes how people live and connect. Societies become larger and more complex, and individuals feel smaller within them. In these conditions, meaning becomes harder to hold on to. Nihilism does not cause this change, it reflects it. It is the philosophical expression of a world where no single story explains everything anymore. Many people live with nihilistic thoughts without ever using the word nihilism. They may say things like "in the end it doesn't really matter," or "everyone just makes it up as they go," or "there is no right way to live." These are not dramatic statements, but they show the same underlying idea. Nihilism does not always appear as rebellion. Often it appears as quiet distance, emotional detachment, or a lack of deep commitment. People still participate in life, but they do so without fully believing in its structures. They follow rules, but they do not feel anchored by them. They pursue goals, but they are aware that those goals are temporary. Nihilism becomes a background feeling rather than a loud declaration. This is why nihilism is so closely connected to modern life. In a world filled with information, opinions, and perspectives, it becomes difficult to believe that any single viewpoint is final. Nihilism does not tell people what to believe instead. It simply removes the idea that belief is guaranteed. This removal creates both freedom and weight. Freedom, because individuals are no longer bound by unquestioned values. Weight, because responsibility increases when meaning is no longer given from outside. If nothing automatically matters, then deciding what matters becomes unavoidable. Nihilism does not answer this problem. It only reveals it. It shows that meaning is not a fact of nature but a human concern. Some people respond to this realization by trying to escape it, returning to old beliefs or adopting new ones quickly. Others remain in the uncertainty, unsure of what should come next. Nihilism is not the end of thinking, but it often feels like standing at the edge of something unknown. It is a pause between certainty and possibility. To understand nihilism is not to agree with it or reject it, but to recognize why it appears and why it continues to return. Before philosophers name it, define it, or argue about it, nihilism first appears as a simple feeling, the sense that the world no longer explains itself. This series begins at that moment, not to rush toward answers, but to understand the questions that nihilism leaves behind. The penguin that walked away. In recent years, a short video began to circulate online showing something very simple and very strange at the same time. A single penguin was seen walking away from its colony, moving slowly but steadily in the opposite direction of the group, heading toward the open landscape with no clear destination. Penguins are animals known for staying together. They survive by moving as a group, by sharing warmth, by following patterns that have existed for thousands of years. When people saw this penguin walking alone, many reactions appeared. Some called it brave. Some called it confused. Some joked that it was done with society. Others felt an unexpected sadness watching it disappear into the distance. What made this moment powerful was not what the penguin was actually doing, but what humans projected onto it. The penguin became a symbol. It looked like a creature stepping outside of meaning itself, leaving behind safety, routine, and certainty. Whether the penguin was sick, disoriented, or simply responding to an instinct does not really matter for the philosophical question it raised. Humans saw in this image something familiar. The idea of stepping away from the group, not because of rebellion, but because the direction everyone else is walking no longer feels right. In nature, most animals do not question their role. They follow instincts shaped by survival. A penguin does not ask why it walks, why it mates, or why it stays with the group. It simply does. Humans are different. Humans ask why constantly. When humans saw the penguin walking away, they did not see an animal making a mistake. They saw a reflection of themselves in moments of quiet doubt. The penguin became a mirror for modern existence. In human societies, meaning often comes from belonging. Family, culture, religion, nation, career, and social roles all tell people who they are and what they should value. Staying within the group provides direction. It tells you where to walk and why you are walking there. But just like the penguin colony, human groups also move in inherited directions. Many people follow paths not because they deeply believe in them, but because everyone else is following them too. Education leads to work. Work leads to status. Status leads to approval. Approval becomes meaning. Nihilism begins when someone notices this pattern and feels that the movement itself no longer explains why they are moving. The penguin walking away feels unsettling because it breaks the image of natural order. It leaves warmth for cold. It leaves safety for uncertainty. It leaves clarity for silence. In philosophy, this moment represents the beginning of existential distance. Not rebellion, not anger, but separation. The penguin does not fight the group. It does not attack it. It simply turns away. Nihilism often looks like this. It is not loud. It is not dramatic. It is quiet withdrawal. A person continues living but no longer fully believes in the stories that once guided them. They still participate, but with an internal distance. Like the penguin, they are still moving, but the direction feels unclear. What makes the penguin story powerful is that it has no explanation. There is no narration telling us why it walks away or what happens next. This lack of explanation creates space. Humans fill that space with meaning. Some see freedom. Some see tragedy. Some see loneliness. This is exactly how nihilism works. This persistence mirrors how doubt works in humans. Once a belief collapses, it rarely returns in its original form. Once someone sees that meaning is fragile, they cannot unsee it. They may adopt new meanings, but they do so with awareness. The penguin story became popular not because it was rare, but because it felt familiar. In a world where many people feel disconnected from traditional structures, the image of quiet departure resonates deeply. It captures the emotional shape of modern nihilism without using words. No speeches. No arguments. Just movement away from the familiar. The penguin does not promise that something better exists ahead. It does not show a destination. This uncertainty is key. Nihilism does not replace old meaning with new meaning. It simply removes certainty. Watching the penguin disappear into the distance forces the viewer to sit with that uncertainty. Will it survive? Will it find something else? Or will it fail? The video does not answer these questions, and neither does nihilism. It only asks whether staying with the group is meaningful simply because it is safe. For humans, this question is deeply uncomfortable. Safety and meaning are often confused. The penguin separates them. It shows that survival and purpose are not the same thing. The penguin may be risking its life, but it is also stepping outside the logic of the colony. In human terms, nihilism is not about wanting destruction. It is about refusing borrowed meaning. It is about noticing that many directions are followed without understanding. The penguin does not explain itself. It does not justify its choice. It does not seek approval. This silence is powerful. It suggests that meaning does not always need explanation, but it also suggests that explanation may not exist. Nihilism lives in this tension. It is the awareness that meaning is not guaranteed, combined with the refusal to pretend otherwise. The penguin walking away is not a lesson. It is a moment. A moment where order breaks gently, without chaos, without drama. Just one figure moving in another direction. This is often how nihilism enters a life. Not as a collapse, but as a quiet realization. A thought that does not shout, but stays. A sense that the group may not be wrong, but it may not be right either. And from that moment on, walking becomes a personal decision rather than a shared one. Why meaning began to collapse? For most of human history, meaning did not feel like a question. People were born into a world where answers already existed. Religion explained where the world came from and why life mattered. Tradition explained how one should live. Family roles explained who a person was supposed to become. Even suffering had a place. Pain was seen as a test, a punishment, or a preparation for something greater. Death was not the end of meaning, but part of it. In this world, individuals did not need to invent purpose. Purpose was inherited. You did not ask what life meant. Life told you. Meaning was external, stable, and shared. Nihilism did not appear in this environment because there was no space for it. Doubt existed, but it was contained within strong structures. Over time, these structures began to weaken, not all at once, but slowly, almost invisibly. The collapse of meaning was not caused by one event, but by a series of changes that altered how humans understood truth, authority, and themselves. One of the earliest pressures came from the rise of scientific thinking. Science did not try to destroy meaning, but it changed the way explanations worked. Natural events no longer needed divine intention to be understood. Thunder was no longer a message. Disease was no longer always punishment. The universe began to look mechanical rather than purposeful. This shift did not immediately remove meaning, but it weakened the idea that meaning was woven into reality itself. As science advanced, humans gained control, but lost mystery. What he meant was that the belief in a divine source of absolute meaning had lost its real power over human life. People still spoke the language of faith and morality, but deep down, they no longer believed in it with the same certainty. Science, historical criticism, and cultural change had slowly eroded the foundations. God did not disappear suddenly. God faded. Nietzsche believed this fading was dangerous because societies were still living as if nothing had changed. Moral rules, ideas of truth, and ideas of purpose were still treated as absolute, even though their source had collapsed. This created what Nietzsche saw as a hidden nihilism. People obeyed values they could no longer justify. They felt guilt, duty, and shame without believing in the system that produced them. For Nietzsche, this was not moral strength but weakness. He believed that when meaning collapses, humans face a choice. They can either deny the collapse and cling to old values, or they can face the emptiness honestly and ask what comes next. Nietzsche called this moment the crisis of nihilism. He saw nihilism as a transitional phase, not a final destination. But he also warned that many people would get stuck in it. He described passive nihilism as a state where individuals lose belief in meaning and respond by withdrawing, numbing themselves, or seeking comfort rather than truth. Passive nihilism does not destroy values actively. It simply stops believing in them while continuing to live mechanically. This can look like resignation, boredom, or quiet despair. Life continues, but without inner fire. Nietzsche saw this as a major danger of modern society. Comfort replaces purpose. Safety replaces greatness. People avoid suffering, but also avoid depth. In contrast, Nietzsche described active nihilism as a more dangerous but potentially creative force. Active nihilism recognizes that old values are false or exhausted and actively seeks to tear them down. They keep moving, like the penguin, but with internal distance. This distance is not always painful. Sometimes it is relieving. It removes false pressure. It allows honesty. But it also removes direction. Without direction, freedom feels heavy. Nihilism does not destroy values instantly. It erodes their foundation. Morality becomes preference. Goals become projects. Identity becomes flexible. This flexibility can be creative, but it can also be empty. The collapse of meaning is not the end of philosophy. It is the beginning of a new question. Not what is the meaning of life, but can meaning survive without certainty? This question will shape everything that follows. In the next parts, this tension will deepen. Some thinkers will try to overcome nihilism. Others will accept it. Some will transform it. But first, it is necessary to sit with the collapse itself, without rushing to solutions. Nihilism begins here, not with rebellion, but with realization. The realization that the world no longer tells us why we are here, and that silence, once noticed, cannot be ignored. Nietzsche and the moment nihilism became visible. Friedrich Nietzsche did not invent nihilism, but he was one of the first thinkers to look directly at it without fear and describe it honestly. Before Nietzsche, many philosophers sensed that something was breaking, but they still tried to protect old structures. Nietzsche did the opposite. He said that the collapse had already happened and that pretending otherwise was dishonest. When Nietzsche wrote about nihilism, he was not speaking only about philosophy, but about culture, psychology, religion, morality, and everyday life. He believed that Western civilization was standing on values that no longer truly convinced people, even if they continued to follow them out of habit. His most famous phrase, "God is dead," is often misunderstood. Nietzsche was not celebrating the death of God, nor was he simply attacking religion. It is important to understand that meaning did not collapse because humans became careless. It collapsed because the old structures could not survive new conditions. The tools that once supported meaning were not designed for a world of constant change, speed, and plurality. When old answers stopped working, many people expected new answers to appear. But nihilism is what appears when no replacement arrives. It is the gap between collapse and reconstruction. Some people respond to this gap by trying to restore old meanings. Others respond by creating new ones. Nihilism sits between these responses. It says, "Not yet." Or maybe, "Never." It does not always deny meaning aggressively. Often, it simply doubts it quietly. A nihilistic person may still live normally, work, love, and plan. But beneath these actions lies uncertainty. Are these things meaningful in themselves, or only because we say they are? Nihilism questions whether meaning exists independently of human desire. It asks whether life has value without interpretation. These questions did not arise suddenly. They emerged gradually as the world became less stable in its explanations. For many, nihilism is not a philosophy they choose, but a condition they notice. It appears in moments of silence, not debate. Late at night. After achievement fails to satisfy. After belief stops comforting. After progress stops inspiring. The collapse of meaning does not always feel dramatic. It often feels like exhaustion. The feeling of continuing without knowing why. The sense that explanations sound thin. That words feel recycled. That motivation comes from habit rather than belief. Nihilism is often misunderstood as despair, but despair implies caring deeply about loss. Nihilism is flatter. It is the feeling that something is missing, but also the uncertainty of whether it was ever real. When meaning collapses, people do not immediately stop living. This can be destructive, but it is also honest. Nietzsche believed that destruction was sometimes necessary to clear space for new values. However, he did not believe that everyone was capable of this task. Creating values requires strength, discipline, and courage. Most people, Nietzsche thought, prefer to follow rather than create. This is where his idea of the last man appears. The last man is not evil or violent. He is comfortable, risk-averse, and satisfied with small pleasures. He avoids pain, avoids ambition, and avoids deep questioning. The last man represents a society that has survived the collapse of meaning by lowering its expectations of life. Instead of asking for greatness, it asks for comfort. Instead of truth, it asks for convenience. Nietzsche feared that modern societies were moving toward this condition. In such a world, nihilism does not appear dramatic. It appears as dullness, as repetition, as a life where nothing is worth dying for, but also nothing is worth truly living for. Nietzsche's response to nihilism was not despair, but challenge. He believed that meaning does not come from the universe, God, or nature. Meaning comes from human creation. But this creation is not arbitrary. It is not simply choosing whatever feels good. Nietzsche believed that values must emerge from life itself, from strength, creativity, and affirmation of existence. This idea is often misunderstood as selfishness or power obsession. In reality, Nietzsche criticized shallow pleasure-seeking. He believed that true affirmation of life includes suffering, struggle, and responsibility. One of his central ideas is the concept of the Übermensch, often translated as the overman or beyond man. This figure is not a superhero, nor a ruler over others. The Übermensch is someone who creates values rather than inherits them. Someone who can live without absolute guarantees and still affirm life. Control feels powerful, but mystery often carries meaning. When the world becomes predictable, it also becomes silent. Another major change came from the decline of absolute religious authority in many parts of the world. As societies became more pluralistic, people encountered different beliefs living side by side. When many belief systems exist at once, certainty becomes harder to maintain. If one truth claims exclusivity, but another truth stands next to it with equal confidence, doubt naturally grows. People began to realize that belief often depends on birthplace rather than revelation. This realization does not immediately destroy faith, but it introduces distance. Belief becomes a choice rather than a fact. Meaning becomes optional rather than necessary. Philosophy also played a role. Thinkers began questioning foundations that were once considered untouchable. They asked whether morality came from God, nature, or human agreement. They asked whether reason could truly access truth. They asked whether the self was stable or fragmented. These questions did not offer simple replacements. They opened gaps. Meaning began to feel less like something discovered and more like something constructed. At the same time, social and economic changes reshaped daily life. Industrialization moved people away from traditional rhythms. Work became separated from community and family. People spent more time performing tasks without seeing their direct impact. Labor lost its visible meaning. A farmer could see food grow. A factory worker often saw only repetition. When actions lose visible purpose, life begins to feel abstract. Urbanization increased anonymity. Individuals became less defined by their role in a small community and more defined by systems they could not fully see or control. This created a sense of replaceability. When a person feels easily replaceable, meaning feels fragile. Modern education also contributed in unexpected ways. When meaning is no longer given, interpretation becomes unavoidable. The penguin is neither heroic nor foolish by default. Those labels come from observers. In the same way, life events do not carry meaning on their own. Humans assign meaning based on values they already hold. Nihilism exposes this process. It shows that meaning is not discovered but placed. The penguin does not know it is becoming a symbol. It does not know it represents isolation, individuality, or philosophical doubt. Humans create that layer. This is important because it reveals something uncomfortable. If meaning can be projected so easily onto a penguin, how stable is the meaning humans project onto their own lives? Many people live as if their goals are natural and necessary, but often those goals are learned rather than chosen. The penguin walking away reminds people of moments when they themselves felt out of alignment with the group. Moments when the shared direction no longer felt convincing. In modern life, this happens often. People question careers they were told would bring fulfillment. They question traditions they were told would bring purpose. They question beliefs that once felt unquestionable. This questioning does not immediately create a new path. Instead, it creates a pause. The penguin walking alone represents this pause. It is not yet a new philosophy. It is not yet a solution. It is simply distance. Nihilism lives in this distance. It is the space between inherited meaning and personal understanding. For some, this space feels empty. For others, it feels honest. The penguin does not appear anxious in the video. It walks calmly, slowly, without panic. This calmness is unsettling because humans expect danger in separation. But nihilism is often calm as well. It is not always despair. Sometimes it is clarity without comfort. The penguin does not rush back. It does not hesitate. It keeps walking. Nietzsche believed that after the death of old meanings, humanity must either create new values or sink into nihilism permanently. The Übermensch represents the possibility of overcoming nihilism, not by denying it, but by passing through it. Another key idea in Nietzsche's philosophy is eternal recurrence. He asks a simple but disturbing question: if you had to live your life again, exactly the same, every joy and every pain, would you accept it? This question is not meant as a scientific theory. It is a test of affirmation. If life feels meaningless, the idea of repeating it forever feels unbearable. But if one can say yes to life as it is, without escape or justification, then life gains a kind of meaning through acceptance. Nietzsche believed that this ability to say yes to existence, even with suffering, was a sign of strength. Nihilism, in this context, is the inability to affirm life once external meaning disappears. Nietzsche did not offer comfort. He offered responsibility. He believed that modern humans were not suffering because life had no meaning, but because they expected meaning to be given to them. When that expectation failed, they felt betrayed. Nietzsche argued that meaning was never guaranteed. It was always created by strong cultures and individuals. The difference is that in the past, this creation was hidden behind myths and gods. Now, it is exposed. This exposure feels dangerous because it removes excuses. If meaning fails, it is no longer God's fault or fate's fault. It is human responsibility. Nietzsche knew that this responsibility would feel heavy. That is why he believed nihilism would dominate modern life for a long time. People would feel lost, anxious, and tired. They would seek distractions, ideologies, or comfort systems to avoid facing the void. Nietzsche did not judge this reaction harshly. He understood it psychologically. But he refused to romanticize it. For him, nihilism was a sickness, but also a diagnosis. You cannot heal what you refuse to name. Nietzsche's importance lies in his honesty. He did not promise that meaning would return easily. He did not promise universal happiness. He believed that the future would be difficult, uneven, and uncertain. Some individuals would rise to the challenge. Many would not. Nihilism, for Nietzsche, was not the end of philosophy. It was the moment philosophy became urgent. The question was no longer abstract. It was existential. How should one live when the old answers no longer work? This question will shape the rest of the series. Because Nietzsche does not close the problem of nihilism. He opens it fully. And once opened, it cannot be ignored. Living with nihilism in everyday life. Nihilism is often discussed as a theory, but for most people it is not something they read about, it is something they feel. It appears quietly in daily life, not as a dramatic declaration that nothing matters, but as a slow weakening of motivation and belief. People still wake up, go to work, talk to others, and make plans, yet beneath these actions there is often a subtle question that never fully leaves: why am I doing this? This question does not always demand an answer. Sometimes it simply exists as a background noise. Nihilism in everyday life rarely looks extreme. It looks ordinary. It looks like routine without conviction. like goals pursued out of habit rather than belief, like success that feels hollow once achieved. Many people experience this without ever using the word nihilism. They may describe it as burnout, emptiness, boredom, or feeling lost. But these experiences are closely connected to the collapse of shared meaning. In earlier societies, daily actions were tied to larger narratives. Work was part of survival. Family roles were clear. Religion provided a story that connected individual suffering to a greater plan. When these narratives weaken, actions lose their symbolic weight. A job becomes just a job. Time becomes something to fill. Pleasure becomes something to chase rather than something that naturally appears. Nihilism grows in this space, not because life becomes unbearable, but because it becomes strangely flat. One of the most common ways nihilism shows itself is through constant distraction. When meaning feels uncertain, silence becomes uncomfortable. People turn to entertainment, scrolling, noise, and stimulation to avoid confronting the question of purpose. This is not because they are weak, but because modern life offers endless ways to escape reflection. Distraction becomes a coping mechanism. It fills time, but not meaning. Nietzsche anticipated this when he described societies that prefer comfort over depth. Distraction reduces discomfort, but it also reduces engagement. Life becomes something to get through rather than something to participate in fully. Another everyday expression of nihilism is irony. Irony creates distance. When people no longer believe deeply, they often protect themselves by not taking anything too seriously. Humor becomes a shield. Cynicism becomes intelligence. Caring too much is seen as naive. This attitude feels safe, but it also prevents commitment. Meaning requires vulnerability. To care about something is to risk disappointment. Nihilism often avoids this risk by refusing full attachment. Everything becomes provisional. Beliefs are held lightly, values are flexible, and identity is constantly adjustable. While this flexibility can be freeing, it also removes grounding. Without grounding, people feel unstable even when nothing is actively wrong. Nihilism also affects how people relate to morality. Instead of seeing moral values as obligations or truths, they are often treated as personal preferences. This can increase tolerance, but it can also weaken responsibility. If everything is subjective, it becomes harder to justify sacrifice. Why endure discomfort for a value that might be arbitrary? This does not turn people into monsters, but it can make ethical decisions feel negotiable. People may still act kindly, but kindness becomes optional rather than meaningful. It becomes a style rather than a commitment. Relationships are also shaped by nihilism. When meaning feels fragile, people often hesitate to invest deeply. They fear wasting time, choosing wrong, or missing out on something better. Commitment feels heavy in a world where nothing feels permanent. Love becomes cautious. Promises feel risky. This creates a culture of temporary connection. Relationships begin intensely but fade quickly. When meaning is uncertain, endurance feels irrational. Why stay? Why build? Why struggle? Nihilism whispers that everything is replaceable. Even people. Work culture reflects this as well. Many people feel disconnected from what they do. Work becomes a means rather than an expression. Success is measured externally, through money or recognition, rather than internally through fulfillment. When success arrives, it often feels anticlimactic. This leads to a cycle of chasing the next goal, hoping it will finally feel meaningful. Nihilism does not deny ambition, but it drains satisfaction. Achievement without meaning feels empty. This emptiness is not always painful. Sometimes it feels neutral. A quiet lack of resonance. Modern mental health language often describes this as numbness. Numbness is not sadness. It is the absence of emotional response. Nihilism often produces numbness because belief fuels emotion. When belief fades, intensity fades with it. People still experience pleasure and pain, but these experiences feel disconnected from a larger story. Without a story, emotions lose continuity. Each moment stands alone. This can make life feel fragmented. Another everyday form of nihilism is constant self-optimization. When no higher purpose exists, the self becomes the project. Productivity, fitness, appearance, and mental health become goals in themselves. Improvement replaces meaning. This can look healthy, but it often hides anxiety. If the self is the only source of value, it must constantly be improved to remain worthwhile. Rest feels undeserved. Failure feels catastrophic. Nihilism turns freedom into pressure. Instead of being liberated from external demands, individuals become responsible for creating value continuously. This is exhausting. Social media amplifies this effect. Lives are presented as curated narratives, filled with purpose, passion, and clarity. For someone experiencing nihilism, this creates a painful contrast. Others appear meaningful, while one's own life feels empty. This comparison deepens alienation. Nihilism becomes personalized. The problem is no longer the world, but the self. Why do others seem fulfilled while I do not? This question ignores the performative nature of modern identity, but emotionally it feels real. Nihilism thrives in isolation. Yet it is important to understand that nihilism is not always destructive. For some, it removes false pressure. It frees individuals from expectations that never felt authentic. It allows honesty. If life has no guaranteed meaning, then failure loses some of its weight. Shame weakens. Nihilism can reduce fear of judgment. It can open space for authenticity. The problem arises when nihilism becomes the final position rather than a transitional one. When uncertainty turns into resignation. Nietzsche believed that living with nihilism without confronting it leads to stagnation. But confronting it does not mean escaping it immediately. It means recognizing how deeply it shapes daily choices, emotions, and relationships. Nihilism is not something that happens only in philosophy books. It happens when motivation feels thin. When joy feels brief. When goals feel replaceable. When nothing feels worth full commitment. Understanding nihilism at this level is crucial, because it explains why many people feel restless even in comfortable lives. Material needs may be met, but symbolic needs are unmet. Humans do not live by survival alone. They need meaning to organize time, suffering, and desire. When meaning collapses, life does not end. It continues, but without coherence. Nihilism is that loss of coherence. It is not loud. It does not shout that nothing matters. It quietly asks whether anything truly does. And for many people, that quiet question follows them through ordinary days, shaping how they live, love, and choose, even when they cannot name it. How humans try to escape nihilism. When meaning begins to disappear, humans rarely sit still and accept the emptiness. Most of the time, they try to escape it. These escapes are not always conscious, and they are not always dishonest. They are often emotional strategies designed to reduce discomfort. Nihilism creates a gap between action and belief, and humans naturally try to close that gap in some way. One common response is the return to certainty. Some people respond to nihilism by embracing strict belief systems, whether religious, political, or ideological. These systems offer clear answers, clear enemies, and clear rules. They reduce ambiguity and restore a sense of direction. In a world that feels uncertain, certainty feels comforting. This does not mean these beliefs are always false or shallow, but the psychological appeal is clear. Certainty removes responsibility. If the rules are given, one does not need to create them. For some, this return feels like relief. For others, it feels like escape. Nietzsche viewed this reaction with suspicion, believing that returning to old values without genuine belief was a form of self-deception. Another response to nihilism is hedonism, the pursuit of pleasure as a substitute for meaning. Nihilism is avoided by dissolving the self into the group. Responsibility shifts outward. This reduces anxiety, but it also reduces individuality. Art is another response. Some individuals transform nihilism into creation. Music, writing, painting, and storytelling become ways to express the absence of meaning rather than escape it. Art does not solve nihilism, but it gives it form. It allows people to live with uncertainty without denying it. Nietzsche believed art was one of the highest responses to nihilism because it affirms life without pretending it has a fixed purpose. Art does not explain. It expresses. Love is also often used as an answer to nihilism. When nothing else feels meaningful, another person can become the center of value. Love gives life intensity and focus. It creates responsibility and sacrifice. But when love is asked to replace all meaning, it becomes fragile. No human can carry that weight forever. When relationships fail, nihilism returns stronger. Some people respond to nihilism by intellectualizing it. They read philosophy, analyze arguments, and debate meaning endlessly. This can be useful, but it can also become a way to stay detached. Understanding nihilism does not automatically change how one lives. Knowledge can become a shield. Nietzsche warned against this form of escape. He believed philosophy should transform life, not replace it with abstraction. Another common response is irony and detachment. By not caring deeply, people protect themselves from disappointment. This attitude is often mistaken for wisdom. But detachment can hollow out experience. Meaning requires risk. Without risk, life becomes flat. Nihilism also pushes some people toward activism. When traditional meaning collapses, political or social causes can provide direction. Fighting injustice, improving society, or saving the planet can feel meaningful. These causes can be genuinely valuable, but they can also become substitutes rather than solutions. When a cause becomes identity, failure feels personal. Burnout follows. Meaning cannot survive on urgency alone. Spirituality is another path people explore. Not necessarily traditional religion, but personal spiritual practices. Meditation, mindfulness, and self-exploration offer calm and presence. These practices do not always answer the question of meaning, but they reduce its emotional weight. They shift focus from purpose to experience. This can soften nihilism without confronting it directly. Nietzsche would likely see this as incomplete, but not useless. Finally, some people accept nihilism. They stop searching for meaning and live anyway. They lower expectations. They focus on simple pleasures and daily routines. This can bring peace. It can also bring stagnation. Acceptance without creation risks becoming passive nihilism. Nietzsche believed that escaping nihilism is impossible if one tries to avoid it. The only way forward is through it. But most people do not want to walk through emptiness. They want to go around it. These escapes are understandable. Nihilism is uncomfortable because it removes guarantees. It forces responsibility onto individuals who may not feel ready. But avoiding nihilism does not make it disappear. It waits. It returns in moments of silence, loss, or failure. The escapes can delay confrontation, but they cannot replace meaning. Understanding these responses helps explain modern life. The constant movement, the distractions, the identities, the causes. They are not random. They are reactions to a world where meaning is no longer given. Nihilism is the shadow behind many modern behaviors. To see it clearly is not to judge, but to understand. And understanding is the first step toward deciding whether nihilism is something to escape, accept, or transform. Can meaning be rebuilt after nihilism? After nihilism has been recognized and felt, a quiet but unavoidable question appears: if meaning is not given, can it be rebuilt? This question does not come with urgency at first. It often arrives gently, after exhaustion. After the excitement of rebellion fades. After distraction no longer works. Humans are not satisfied living in permanent emptiness. Even those who claim that nothing matters usually behave as if something does. They care about time, about relationships, about small comforts, about dignity. This suggests that the desire for meaning does not disappear with nihilism. What disappears is trust in inherited meaning. Rebuilding meaning after nihilism does not mean returning to old beliefs unchanged. It means creating something that can survive doubt. This is where the challenge becomes serious. Any meaning that collapses under questioning will not last. Modern meaning must coexist with uncertainty. One of the first ways people attempt to rebuild meaning is through personal values. Instead of asking what is universally true, they ask what feels honest to them. This shift is important. It recognizes that meaning is lived, not discovered. However, personal values alone are fragile if they remain isolated. Without connection to something larger, values can feel arbitrary. This is why many people struggle to sustain personal meaning over time. It requires constant reinforcement. Another approach is responsibility. Some thinkers, especially existentialists, argue that meaning emerges from responsibility rather than belief. Choosing to care, to act, to commit, even without guarantees, becomes meaningful in itself. Meaning is not something you feel first and act on later. It is something that forms through action. This idea reframes meaning as a process rather than a truth. You do not find meaning. You practice it. This practice does not eliminate doubt, but it gives life structure. Relationships play a central role here. Caring for another person creates responsibility that cannot be easily dismissed as meaningless. Even nihilistic individuals often find that responsibility toward others feels real, regardless of philosophical doubts. This suggests that meaning may not be an abstract property of the universe, but an emergent property of connection. When you are needed, life feels less empty. This does not solve nihilism intellectually, but it weakens its emotional force. Work can also become a site of rebuilt meaning, but only when it is connected to contribution rather than status. When work is seen as participation in something shared, it gains weight. This is why volunteer work, teaching, and caregiving often feel meaningful even when poorly rewarded. Meaning here comes from impact rather than recognition. Creativity is another powerful response. Creating something that did not exist before gives a sense of authorship over life. Writing, building, designing, or shaping ideas transforms the individual from a passive observer into an active participant. Nietzsche valued creation because it affirms life without needing justification. Creation does not ask whether life is meaningful. It behaves as if it is. This behavior itself becomes meaning. Time also plays a role. Meaning often becomes visible only in retrospect. When individuals look back and see coherence in their choices, meaning appears. This suggests that meaning is narrative. It is not felt in every moment. It is constructed through continuity. Nihilism disrupts narrative by breaking belief in a shared story. Rebuilding meaning often involves creating a personal story that can tolerate ambiguity. Suffering becomes part of the story rather than evidence against meaning. This is crucial. Any meaning that cannot include suffering will collapse. Acceptance of limits is another step. Nihilism often arises from unrealistic expectations. The belief that life must be constantly fulfilling sets it up for failure. When meaning is understood as occasional rather than constant, it becomes more sustainable. Silence, boredom, and confusion stop being enemies. They become neutral spaces. Spiritual practices can support this shift, not by offering answers, but by teaching presence. Being present reduces the demand for explanation. It allows experience to exist without justification. This does not eliminate the question of meaning, but it softens its urgency. Nietzsche would argue that this is not enough, but it is part of the process. Community also becomes important. Shared practices, rituals, and traditions can create meaning even when their metaphysical foundations are uncertain. Humans have always created meaning together. Even if absolute truth is unavailable, shared commitment still matters. Celebrations, mourning, and collective memory bind individuals into something larger than themselves. This shared dimension protects meaning from becoming purely subjective. Education also plays a role. Teaching individuals not what to think, but how to live with uncertainty, prepares them for a world without guarantees. Meaning becomes something negotiated rather than imposed. This negotiation is ongoing. It requires humility. No meaning is final. This can be unsettling, but it is also honest. One of the greatest dangers after nihilism is rushing toward replacement meanings that are too rigid. History shows that when meaning collapses, extreme ideologies often rise to fill the void. These ideologies offer clarity, but at a high cost. They demand obedience and suppress doubt. Rebuilding meaning responsibly means resisting this temptation. Meaning must remain flexible enough to evolve. It must allow questioning without collapsing. This balance is difficult. It requires maturity. Nietzsche believed that few individuals were capable of this level of responsibility. But modern life demands it from many. Meaning after nihilism is not dramatic. It does not announce itself. It grows slowly through commitment, creation, and care. It survives not because it is certain, but because it is lived. Nihilism does not disappear entirely. It remains as a background awareness that meanings are human-made. But this awareness does not have to paralyze. It can sharpen. It can make meaning more deliberate. Instead of asking what life means, the question becomes how should I live knowing that meaning is fragile? This shift changes everything. It moves philosophy from abstraction into daily life. Meaning is no longer something to be solved, but something to be maintained. Like health. Like trust. Like relationships. It requires attention. It requires renewal. And it requires acceptance that it may fail and be rebuilt again. Nihilism does not mark the end of meaning. It marks the end of unconscious meaning. What comes after is not certainty, but choice. And in that choice, meaning becomes possible again, not as a gift, but as a responsibility. The absurd, when meaning is desired but never given. After nihilism exposes the collapse of inherited meaning, another experience often follows, one that feels similar but is not the same. This experience is what Albert Camus called the absurd. The absurd is born from a simple conflict. Humans deeply desire meaning, clarity, and purpose, yet the universe offers no clear answers. Unlike nihilism, which questions whether meaning exists at all, the absurd begins with the recognition that the search for meaning itself is unavoidable. Humans ask why instinctively. They want coherence. They want their suffering to fit into a story. The absurd arises when this desire meets silence. Camus did not see this silence as hostile or evil. he saw it as indifferent. The universe does not deny meaning. It simply does not respond. This silence is what creates tension. Nihilism often resolves this tension by concluding that meaning does not exist. Absurdism refuses this conclusion. It also refuses false hope. Education expanded knowledge but also exposed contradictions. Students learned multiple interpretations of history, morality, and truth. This created intellectual freedom, but also uncertainty. If everything can be questioned, what remains solid? Over time, questioning itself became a habit, but answers became temporary. Meaning began to feel provisional. Something you adopt for a while, then revise or abandon. This flexibility sounds liberating, but it also removes permanence. Without permanence, meaning feels thin. Another pressure came from the rise of individualism. Individuals were told they were free, unique, and responsible for their own happiness. This idea sounds empowering, but it carries a hidden burden. If meaning is your responsibility, failure feels personal. In traditional societies, suffering could be explained by fate or divine will. In modern societies, suffering often feels like a personal failure. If you are free and unhappy, something must be wrong with you. This creates anxiety rather than purpose. The promise of happiness becomes an obligation rather than a gift. When happiness does not arrive, meaning collapses into self-blame. Technology accelerated these changes. Media exposed people to endless comparisons. Other lives, other choices, other values became constantly visible. This made commitment harder. Choosing one path meant rejecting thousands of others. Meaning requires limitation. Infinite options weaken attachment. When everything is possible, nothing feels necessary. The internet also changed how truth functions. Information became abundant, but authority became unclear. Conflicting narratives coexist without resolution. This erodes trust. Without trust, shared meaning becomes difficult. People retreat into personal bubbles, each with its own version of reality. Meaning fragments. Politics, morality, and identity lose common ground. Nihilism grows in these fractures. Instead, it stays inside the tension without resolving it. Camus believed that this condition was not a philosophical problem to solve, but a human condition to live with. He famously wrote that the fundamental philosophical question is whether life is worth living. This question does not come from despair, but from honesty. If life has no guaranteed meaning, why continue? Camus rejected suicide as a solution, not because life has hidden meaning, but because suicide avoids the confrontation. It ends the question rather than living it. He also rejected what he called philosophical suicide, the act of inventing transcendent meanings to escape discomfort. For Camus, appealing to God, destiny, or abstract purpose without genuine belief was a betrayal of honesty. The absurd demands clarity without comfort. It asks humans to see reality as it is and still live fully. Camus used the myth of Sisyphus to illustrate this condition. Sisyphus is condemned to roll a stone up a hill for eternity, only to watch it roll back down each time. His task has no final purpose. It never ends. On the surface, this seems like the ultimate image of meaninglessness. Yet Camus argues that Sisyphus can be imagined as happy. Not because the task suddenly gains meaning, but because Sisyphus becomes aware of his condition and accepts it without illusion. His awareness transforms his punishment. He owns his struggle. The stone is his stone. This does not give life meaning in a traditional sense. It gives it dignity. Camus believed that rebellion is the proper response to the absurd. Rebellion does not mean violence or chaos. It means refusing to surrender to despair or false hope. It means continuing to live, love, and act without justification. Rebellion says, I know there is no final answer, and I live anyway. This attitude preserves intensity. Nihilism often flattens experience by removing belief. The absurd preserves intensity by refusing conclusions. It keeps the question open. It does not answer the question of meaning, but it shows how life can remain vivid even when the answer never comes. And in a world shaped by nihilism, that may be one of the most honest responses available. Freedom, choice, and the weight of meaning. After nihilism removes inherited meaning and absurdism teaches how to live without answers, another response appears that feels both empowering and overwhelming: existential freedom. Jean-Paul Sartre is one of the philosophers most closely associated with this idea. Sartre agreed with nihilism on one crucial point: there is no built-in meaning to life. There is no fixed human nature, no divine plan, no predetermined purpose waiting to be discovered. But Sartre refused to stop there. For him, this absence was not just a loss. It was a condition of freedom. His most famous statement, that existence comes before essence, means that humans are not born with a defined purpose. They exist first and only later define themselves through actions. A knife is designed to cut. Its essence comes before its existence. A human, Sartre argued, has no such blueprint. You are not born to be anything in particular. You become something through what you do. This idea sounds liberating at first. If there is no fixed meaning, then you are free to create your own. But Sartre insisted that this freedom is not light or comfortable. He described it as a burden. Humans are condemned to be free. This phrase sounds dramatic, but its meaning is simple. You cannot escape choice. Even refusing to choose is a choice. Even following orders is a choice. Even surrendering to habit is a choice. There is no external authority to blame. This is where Sartre separates himself from nihilism. Nihilism often says nothing matters, so choices lose importance. Sartre says the opposite. Because nothing matters in advance, every choice matters deeply. You are not just choosing for yourself. You are showing what you believe a human being should be. This openness allows for joy, even without purpose. Joy does not need meaning to exist. It needs presence. Camus emphasized simple experiences: sunlight, friendship, physical movement, conversation. These experiences do not explain life, but they fill it. Absurdism shifts focus from explanation to engagement. Life is not something to be solved. It is something to be lived despite its lack of clarity. This perspective differs from Nietzsche in important ways. Nietzsche believed in overcoming nihilism by creating new values. Camus was more modest. He did not believe humans could fully escape the absurd. Any attempt to impose final meaning would eventually collapse. Instead, Camus argued for living well within limits. This includes accepting death as final. Death gives urgency to life, but not meaning. It ends the question, which is why it cannot be used as an answer. Absurdism also affects morality. Without absolute meaning, moral choices cannot rely on universal rules. Instead, Camus emphasized solidarity. Humans suffer together. This shared condition creates ethical responsibility. Compassion becomes meaningful not because it is commanded, but because suffering is real. This grounding of ethics in shared vulnerability avoids both nihilistic indifference and moral absolutism. The absurd does not deny value. It denies justification. It says that values exist because humans live and feel, not because the universe endorses them. This is a fragile foundation, but it is honest. Living with the absurd requires courage. Not heroic courage, but quiet persistence. It means waking up each day without expecting answers. It means acting without guarantees. This can feel exhausting, but it can also feel freeing. When meaning is no longer demanded, experience becomes lighter. Expectations loosen. Failure hurts less. Success does not need to last forever. Everything becomes temporary, and this temporariness adds intensity. When life lacks purpose, pleasure becomes the immediate justification for action. If nothing matters in the long term, then feeling good in the short term seems reasonable. Modern consumer culture supports this response strongly. Entertainment, travel, food, and experiences are marketed as sources of fulfillment. Pleasure is not meaningless in itself, but when it becomes the sole reason to live, it loses depth. Pleasure fades quickly. It requires constant renewal. This creates a cycle of craving rather than satisfaction. Nihilism does not disappear in this cycle. It is temporarily distracted. Another escape is productivity. Some people respond to meaninglessness by working constantly. They fill time with tasks, goals, and achievements. Productivity creates structure. It creates measurable progress. It creates a sense of movement. But movement is not the same as direction. Work can feel meaningful while it is happening, but when it stops, the underlying question returns. Why was this done? Productivity without purpose can become a form of avoidance. The busier the schedule, the less space there is for reflection. Many people prefer exhaustion over emptiness. Identity is another common escape. When meaning collapses, people often attach themselves strongly to identities. These identities can be based on profession, lifestyle, beliefs, or social roles. Identity provides stability. It answers the question "Who am I?" even if it does not answer "Why am I here?" The danger is that identity becomes rigid. When identity is threatened, the individual feels threatened. Nihilism hides beneath the surface, waiting. Another powerful escape from nihilism is belonging. Humans are social creatures. When meaning is uncertain, community can replace it. Being part of a group creates shared values and shared purpose. This can be healthy, but it can also become dangerous when belonging replaces thinking. Groups can offer meaning, but they can also demand conformity. Camus believed that happiness was possible within the absurd, but it would be a different kind of happiness. Not fulfillment, but aliveness. Not peace, but engagement. This kind of happiness does not rest. It moves. It does not resolve questions. It coexists with them. In modern life, the absurd appears often. People work jobs that feel repetitive. They repeat routines. They scroll, wait, commute. Like Sisyphus, they push stones that roll back down. Absurdism does not romanticize this condition, but it offers a way to inhabit it consciously. Awareness changes experience. When one sees repetition clearly, it loses some of its weight. Life stops pretending to be something else. This honesty is calming. It removes disappointment. You stop waiting for life to justify itself. You simply live it. Absurdism also resists despair by rejecting final judgments. Nihilism often concludes that because there is no ultimate meaning, life is empty. Absurdism says emptiness is not a conclusion, but a condition. You live inside it. You do not solve it. This difference matters. It allows life to continue without illusion. Camus was careful not to turn absurdism into a doctrine. The moment it becomes fixed, it betrays itself. Absurdism must remain an attitude, not a belief system. It is lived, not taught. It does not promise redemption. It offers clarity. In the context of nihilism, the absurd provides a middle path. It neither denies the collapse of meaning nor rushes to rebuild it. It stands in the open space and learns to breathe there. For many people, this is more realistic than heroic value creation. It matches modern life, with its uncertainty and fragmentation. The absurd does not ask humans to be more than they are. It asks them to be awake. Awake to repetition. Awake to limitation. Awake to the beauty that appears without reason. In this sense, absurdism is not pessimistic. It is restrained. It lowers expectations without lowering engagement. Every action becomes a statement. This creates anxiety. Sartre believed that much of human behavior is driven by an attempt to escape this anxiety. He called this bad faith. Bad faith occurs when people pretend they are not free. They hide behind roles, rules, or expectations. A person might say, "I had no choice, this is just how things are," or "this is just who I am." Sartre argued that these statements are comforting lies. They reduce responsibility. They make life easier, but less honest. Bad faith does not mean deliberate dishonesty. It is often unconscious. People genuinely feel trapped by circumstances, but Sartre insisted that even within limits, there is always some freedom. How you respond, how you interpret, how you act. These choices remain. Nihilism often appears when people feel this freedom but do not know how to use it. The collapse of meaning removes guidance, but freedom remains. This creates paralysis. Sartre believed that nihilism is not the absence of meaning, but the refusal to accept responsibility for creating it. Meaning, in his view, is not discovered through reflection alone. It emerges through commitment. You choose, you act, and meaning follows. This does not mean that any choice is equally good. Sartre did not believe in moral relativism in the shallow sense. He believed that because humans share freedom, they share responsibility. You cannot justify harming others by appealing to personal meaning alone. Freedom must recognize freedom. This idea grounds ethics without absolute rules. Responsibility replaces law. This is demanding. It requires constant awareness. Sartre did not offer comfort. He offered clarity. He believed that many modern individuals feel empty because they are waiting for permission to live authentically. They want confirmation, validation, or guarantees. Sartre said there are none. You act first. You define yourself through action. Regret and uncertainty are part of this process. You cannot step outside time and see whether your choices were correct. You live them. This makes life fragile. But it also makes it real. Sartre's philosophy explains why nihilism often feels suffocating. When meaning collapses, people feel exposed. Without external structures, they feel naked. Sartre says this exposure is the truth of human existence. The structures were always supports, not foundations. They helped us avoid facing freedom directly. Once they fall, freedom becomes visible. Anxiety is the price of freedom. But anxiety is not a flaw. It is a sign that you understand what is at stake. Many people try to escape this anxiety through routine, ideology, or distraction. Sartre saw these as understandable, but dishonest. Authenticity, for Sartre, means acting while knowing that there is no ultimate justification. You choose without certainty. You accept consequences. You do not pretend that your choices are inevitable. This does not make life easier. It makes it meaningful. Meaning here is not comfort. It is coherence between belief and action. Sartre believed that humans often suffer not because life is meaningless, but because they live in contradiction. They want freedom but deny it. They want meaning but refuse responsibility. Existential freedom demands maturity. It requires individuals to stop asking what life means and start asking what they are doing. This shift is subtle but powerful. It moves philosophy from theory to practice. Life becomes a project, not a puzzle. You do not solve it. You build it. Sartre also emphasized that freedom exists within limits. You do not choose your birth, your era, or many of your conditions. But you choose how these conditions shape you. This is where dignity appears. Even in extreme situations, humans retain some freedom. This belief gave existentialism its ethical force. It insists that humans are never merely objects. They are always agents. According to him, most people do not truly exist as themselves. They drift through life absorbed in routines, expectations, and social norms. He called this condition everydayness. In everydayness, life feels busy but empty, familiar but distant. People wake up, work, consume, rest, repeat. Nothing feels deeply wrong, yet something feels missing. Heidegger believed this was the most dangerous form of nihilism because it does not announce itself. It feels normal. In everyday life, individuals do not choose their values consciously. They inherit them. They do not ask why they live the way they do. They simply follow. Heidegger described this as living according to the they. The they is not a specific group. It is everyone and no one. It is what people say, what people expect, what people do. When someone says, "This is just how things are done," they are speaking from the they. In this state, responsibility dissolves quietly. No one is directly accountable. Life becomes anonymous. Heidegger believed that this condition is closely tied to nihilism, because meaning disappears without anyone noticing. Nothing dramatic happens. No belief collapses. Life simply becomes shallow. The individual disappears into roles. Heidegger did not accuse people of laziness or stupidity. He believed everydayness is tempting because it is comfortable. It protects us from anxiety. It shields us from deeper questions. But it also blocks authenticity. Authenticity, for Heidegger, does not mean being unique or expressive. It means owning one's existence. It means recognizing that your life is yours, finite, unrepeatable, and moving toward an end. This is where Heidegger introduces one of his most important ideas, being toward death. Death, for Heidegger, is not just a biological event at the end of life. It is a constant presence. It defines existence by giving it limits. Everyone knows intellectually that they will die, but most people live as if death belongs to others. In everydayness, death is something that happens eventually, somewhere else. Heidegger argued that this avoidance is central to modern nihilism. When death is hidden, life loses urgency. Choices lose weight. Time becomes something to fill rather than something to live. Being toward death does not mean obsessing over mortality. It means acknowledging that life is finite and that this finitude gives meaning to every moment. When someone truly understands that their time is limited, everyday distractions lose some of their power. Heidegger believed that anxiety plays a crucial role here. Unlike fear, which has an object, anxiety has none. It arises when familiar structures lose their grip. In moments of anxiety, the world feels strange. Meaning slips. This experience resembles nihilism, but Heidegger saw it as an opportunity. Anxiety reveals the emptiness of everyday life. It strips away the they. It exposes the individual to their own existence. Many people try to escape anxiety quickly. They distract themselves, explain it away, or suppress it. Heidegger believed this was a mistake. Anxiety is not a problem to solve. It is a signal. It shows that life cannot be reduced to routines. It shows that existence demands attention. In this sense, nihilism is not something to defeat, but something to listen to. Heidegger believed that modern technology intensifies everydayness. Technology organizes the world for efficiency. Everything becomes a resource. Time becomes something to manage. People become functions. While technology increases comfort, it also increases distance from being. Life becomes measured, optimized, and controlled. In such a world, deep meaning struggles to survive. Nihilism does not appear as despair, but as indifference. Heidegger worried that this indifference would become the dominant mood of modern life. Not sadness, not rebellion, just quiet emptiness. Unlike Sartre, Heidegger did not emphasize choice as the foundation of meaning. He believed that meaning emerges from attentiveness, from dwelling in the world rather than rushing through it. Authentic existence requires slowing down, noticing, and responding thoughtfully. This does not mean retreating from society. It means engaging consciously. Heidegger believed that authenticity is fragile and temporary. No one lives authentically all the time. Everydayness always returns. The goal is not permanent clarity, but repeated awakening. Being toward death helps this awakening because it places life in perspective. It reminds the individual that their existence is not infinite. This awareness sharpens experience. It makes moments heavier and more real. Nihilism often appears when life feels endless and empty at the same time. Heidegger's response is not to invent meaning, but to uncover it through presence. Meaning is not something added to life. It is something revealed when life is lived fully. This idea contrasts sharply with nihilism's claim that nothing matters. Heidegger does not say that everything matters equally. He says that existence itself matters, simply because it is happening and will end. This is not moral meaning. It is existential weight. In everyday life, people often postpone living. They wait for the right moment, the right condition, the right certainty. Heidegger believed this postponement is a form of self-abandonment. Life does not begin later. It is already unfolding. Nihilism thrives in postponement. It grows when life is treated as preparation rather than participation. Heidegger's philosophy invites a different attitude. Not optimism, not despair, but seriousness. A calm seriousness rooted in the understanding that existence is finite and exposed. This seriousness does not remove suffering, but it prevents numbness. Numbness, for Heidegger, is the real danger. A numb life may appear stable, but it lacks depth. It appears in ordinary life, not just philosophy books. The moment someone realizes that tomorrow will look like today, and today like yesterday, the absurd can appear. Camus did not ask people to escape this feeling. He asked them to stay with it and act anyway. Love anyway. Build anyway. Care anyway. In this sense, Camus stands between nihilism and hope. He refuses both collapse and illusion. He does not promise meaning at the end. He promises dignity in the struggle. This dignity comes from lucidity. Seeing clearly, without lying to oneself. Nihilism says that clarity leads to emptiness. Camus says clarity leads to rebellion. A quiet, steady rebellion that refuses both despair and fantasy. In modern life, Camus feels especially relevant. People are surrounded by noise, entertainment, and explanations, yet many feel empty. The absurd is often hidden beneath distraction. When distractions fail, nihilism can surface suddenly. Camus offers no easy comfort, but he offers honesty. He tells us that the universe owes us nothing, but that we still owe something to ourselves and to each other. Living without illusions does not mean living without joy. Joy becomes sharper when it is not guaranteed. A sunset matters more when it is not eternal. A conversation matters more when it will end. Camus believed that accepting the absurd deepens life rather than shrinking it. Nihilism closes life by declaring it meaningless. Camus opens life by saying that meaning is not required for life to be worth living. The struggle itself, he famously said, is enough to fill a human heart. After nihilism, living, creating, and choosing meaning. After nihilism has done its work, after old beliefs weaken and familiar meanings fall apart, a quiet question remains. What happens next? Nihilism is often treated as an ending, but in reality it is a passage. It clears space. It removes illusions. It strips life of guarantees. A person may wake up one morning and feel that everything is strangely distant. Life continues, but its reasons feel thin. This is the absurd revealing itself. Camus argued that nihilism often grows from this experience. When meaning is not found, people may conclude that nothing matters. But Camus rejected this conclusion. He believed nihilism misunderstands the absurd. The absurd does not mean that life is worthless. It means that life has no guaranteed meaning given from outside. There is no cosmic plan, no ultimate explanation waiting at the end. This realization can feel crushing, but Camus believed it could also be freeing. He famously asked what he called the only serious philosophical question, whether life is worth living. Suicide, for Camus, was not just a personal tragedy. It was a philosophical response to the absurd. If life has no meaning, why continue? Camus rejected suicide completely. He argued that ending one's life is a form of surrender. It escapes the absurd rather than confronting it. He also rejected what he called philosophical suicide. This occurs when people invent beliefs or systems to escape the absurd. Religion, rigid ideologies, or absolute truths can become ways to silence the uncomfortable silence of the universe. Camus believed these solutions are dishonest. They deny reality in order to feel comfort. For Camus, the proper response to the absurd is neither suicide nor illusion. It is rebellion. Rebellion does not mean violence or anger. It means a constant refusal to give up. It is the decision to live fully while knowing that life has no ultimate meaning. This may sound contradictory, but Camus believed it was the most honest position. To live without appeal, without hope for a final answer, and without resignation. He illustrated this idea through the myth of Sisyphus. Sisyphus is condemned by the gods to push a heavy stone up a mountain, only for it to roll back down every time it reaches the top. His task is endless and meaningless. For Camus, Sisyphus represents the human condition. Work, routine, repetition, an effort that seemed to lead nowhere. But Camus imagined Sisyphus smiling. Not because he enjoys the task, but because he owns it. He is aware of his fate and accepts it without illusion. In that awareness, Camus believed, Sisyphus becomes free. The gods control his task, but not his attitude. This image directly challenges nihilism. Nihilism says that if life has no meaning, then nothing matters. Camus responds that meaning does not need to be eternal to be real. A moment can matter even if it disappears. A choice can be meaningful even if it changes nothing forever. Camus believed that meaning is not discovered but created through engagement. Not grand meaning, but local, human meaning. Friendship, love, beauty, effort, honesty. These do not solve the absurd. They exist alongside it. Camus insisted that we must not deny the absurd or try to escape it. We must live with it openly. This requires courage. It also requires limits. Camus rejected extreme ideologies because they promise absolute meaning and justify destruction in its name. He believed that accepting the absurd leads to moderation and compassion. When no absolute truth exists, human life becomes precious. Not sacred in a religious sense, but fragile and irreplaceable. This fragility demands care. Nihilism often leads to detachment. Camus' response leads to involvement. He believed that revolt against meaninglessness is expressed through living intensely and ethically, without expecting cosmic rewards. Happiness, for Camus, is not comfort or security. It is intensity and awareness. A life lived fully in the present, without false hopes, but also without despair. Camus was deeply concerned with everyday people, not abstract thinkers. He wrote about workers, doctors, lovers, and strangers. He believed the absurd belongs to everyone. When this happens, many people feel lost, but this loss is not the final state. It is a beginning that feels empty only because it is open. When meaning is no longer given, life does not stop. People still wake up, work, love, suffer, and hope. The difference is that these experiences are no longer protected by a larger story that explains everything. This is where a new responsibility appears. If meaning is not handed down, then meaning becomes something lived rather than received. This idea can feel heavy, but it can also feel honest. Without absolute truths, people must decide how to live without pretending that their choices are backed by the universe itself. Many philosophers after Nietzsche and Camus struggled with this question. They did not ask how to escape nihilism, but how to live through it. One common misunderstanding is that nihilism destroys morality completely. In practice, this rarely happens. People continue to care about others, avoid harm, and seek fairness. The difference is that these values are no longer justified by divine command or eternal law. They are justified by human experience. Pain is avoided not because it is cosmically wrong, but because suffering is real. Kindness matters not because it is written into the structure of reality, but because life is fragile. This shift changes the tone of morality. It becomes softer but also more demanding. Without external authority, individuals must take responsibility for their values. This is uncomfortable. It removes excuses. A person can no longer say they are simply following orders, tradition, or fate. Choices become personal. This is why nihilism often feels frightening. Freedom without direction can feel like falling. But freedom also allows creativity. Nietzsche believed that after the collapse of old values, humanity faced a dangerous moment. Without guidance, people might fall into passive nihilism, a state of exhaustion where nothing seems worth effort. This can be seen today in apathy, cynicism, and constant distraction. But Nietzsche also believed in active nihilism, which does not stop at destruction. It moves toward creation. Creating values does not mean inventing fantasies or pretending that values are eternal. It means choosing how to live with awareness. It means shaping one's life as a response to reality rather than as an escape from it. This does not require greatness or fame. It can be quiet and ordinary. Raising a child with care. Doing honest work. Refusing cruelty even when it is convenient. These choices are not justified by universal meaning, but they create local meaning. This local meaning does not claim to be permanent or absolute. It exists only as long as it is lived. Many people worry that meaning created by humans is weaker than meaning given by religion or tradition. But created meaning has a different strength. It is flexible. It can respond to change. It does not collapse when old explanations fail. In modern life, where cultures mix and beliefs shift quickly, this flexibility becomes important. Fixed meanings often break under pressure. Chosen meanings can adapt. This does not mean that everything becomes relative or arbitrary. Human beings share common experiences. Loss, fear, love, hunger, and hope are widely understood. From these shared experiences, values naturally arise. Care, trust, and responsibility do not need cosmic proof. They grow from living together. Nihilism does not erase these experiences. It simply removes the claim that they are guaranteed by the universe. Some thinkers argue that nihilism actually deepens meaning by removing false comfort. When life is no longer seen as preparation for something else, it becomes more immediate. Moments matter because they will not return. Relationships matter because they are finite. Time becomes precious not because it leads somewhere, but because it passes. This awareness can sharpen attention. People may listen more closely, choose more carefully, and appreciate more fully. Of course, nihilism does not automatically lead to wisdom. It can lead to despair, addiction, or withdrawal. But these responses are not caused by nihilism itself. They come from resisting it or misunderstanding it. When people expect nihilism to provide answers, they feel disappointed. Nihilism provides clarity, not comfort. Comfort must come from elsewhere. Often, it comes from engagement. Doing something, even without guarantee, can ground life. Work, art, movement, and care connect the individual to the present moment. Existential thinkers emphasized action over explanation. Life is not solved by thinking alone. It is lived forward. Modern society often encourages endless analyses. People search for perfect meaning before acting. Nihilism interrupts this pattern. It says that waiting for certainty may mean never living at all. Choices must be made without complete knowledge. This is not a failure. It is the human condition. After nihilism, humility becomes important. Without absolute truth, people must accept that they may be wrong. This reduces fanaticism. It also encourages dialogue. When no one possesses final answers, listening becomes valuable. Meaning becomes something shaped together rather than imposed. This idea has political and social implications. Extreme ideologies often arise from fear of meaninglessness. They promise certainty and identity. Nihilism exposes these promises as fragile. But exposure alone is not enough. People still need belonging and purpose. Communities built around shared responsibility rather than absolute belief may offer a quieter alternative. In daily life, living after nihilism often looks simple from the outside. There may be no dramatic declarations. A person wakes up, does their work, cares for others, and rests. The difference lies in awareness. They know that nothing guarantees the value of their actions except their commitment to them. This makes sincerity important. Without external reward, actions must be chosen for their own sake. This does not eliminate joy. Joy becomes more grounded. It is not tied to destiny or success. It arises from presence. A meal shared, a task completed, a walk taken without purpose beyond itself. These moments do not solve the question of meaning. They answer it temporarily through experience. Nihilism does not demand that life be heavy or serious. It allows lightness. When nothing is sacred in an absolute sense, many things become precious in a human sense. This shift changes how failure is seen. Without a cosmic plan, mistakes are not moral disasters. They are part of learning. This can reduce shame. People are no longer measured against impossible standards. They are measured against their own honesty and effort. In this way, nihilism can support compassion. Everyone is navigating without a map. Everyone is improvising. This shared uncertainty can bring people closer. In the end, nihilism does not tell people how to live. It removes illusions and leaves a space. What fills that space depends on the individual and the culture. Some fill it with distraction. Some with creativity. Some with care. Nihilism is not the final word. It is the silence after a story ends, before a new one begins. What comes next is not written. It is lived, moment by moment, choice by choice, without guarantee, but not without possibility. Nihilism in everyday life. Quiet choices, small meanings. Nihilism does not usually enter life as a dramatic event. It does not arrive with a clear announcement or a philosophical label. For most people, it appears slowly and quietly, woven into ordinary moments. It can be felt when achievements no longer satisfy, when routines feel empty, or when long-term goals lose their emotional weight. A person may still function perfectly well, go to work, talk to friends, and plan for the future, yet underneath there is a subtle feeling that something has shifted. The old reasons for doing things feel weaker, less convincing. This is how nihilism often lives in everyday life. It does not remove action, but it removes certainty. Modern life makes this experience common. People are exposed to many belief systems, lifestyles, and values at the same time. What once felt obvious now appears optional. Marriage, career, faith, success, even happiness itself become choices rather than duties. While this freedom sounds positive, it also creates pressure. When nothing is required, everything becomes questionable. Nihilism grows in this space of constant questioning. Many people respond by filling their time with noise. Entertainment, social media, endless content, and constant activity can serve as shields against emptiness. When the mind is busy, it does not ask difficult questions. Nihilism is not eliminated by distraction, but it can be delayed. Yet silence eventually returns. In quiet moments, people may realize that they are not living toward a clear purpose, only moving from one task to another. This realization does not always bring sadness. Sometimes it brings neutrality, a flatness. Life continues, but without emotional depth. This is one of the most common forms of everyday nihilism. It is not despair, but numbness. Philosophers often focused on dramatic responses to nihilism, but everyday life shows a more subtle version. People adapt. They lower expectations. They stop asking large questions. This can protect stability, but it can also reduce vitality. When nothing seems deeply meaningful, effort feels optional. Care becomes selective. This is why nihilism is sometimes linked to cynicism. Cynicism is a protective stance. It prevents disappointment by refusing belief. Yet cynicism also limits connection. Nihilism denies this agency by flattening value. Existentialism restores agency by insisting on choice. But this restoration comes with cost. You cannot hide. You cannot blame fate. You cannot wait for meaning to arrive. You must act. Many people find this frightening. That fear often pushes them back toward nihilism or dogma. Sartre knew this. He did not believe existentialism would be popular because it offers no escape. But he believed it was honest. In modern life, existential freedom appears in small ways. Choosing a career without guarantees. Ending a relationship without certainty. Speaking honestly without knowing the outcome. These moments carry weight because there is no script. Meaning is not behind you. It is ahead of you, uncertain and incomplete. Sartre believed that this incompleteness is not a flaw. It is what keeps life open. Nihilism closes life by declaring nothing matters. Existentialism opens it by declaring that everything depends on what you do. This is not optimism. It is responsibility. It does not promise happiness. It promises agency. In a world where meaning has collapsed, agency becomes the raw material of meaning. You cannot escape uncertainty, but you can choose how to live within it. That choice does not solve nihilism, but it transforms it. Nihilism becomes the starting point rather than the conclusion. And in that shift, meaning does not return as a gift, but as a task that never fully ends. Everyday life, lostness, and being toward death. After existential freedom and the heavy responsibility of choice, another philosopher approaches meaning from a quieter and more unsettling direction. Martin Heidegger did not begin with freedom or morality. He began with being. His question was simple but radical: what does it mean to exist at all? Heidegger believed that modern humans live very close to nihilism without realizing it, not because they believe in nothing, but because they live superficially. When nothing is taken seriously, nothing truly matters. However, everyday life also shows another response to nihilism. Some people accept uncertainty and continue anyway. They stop waiting for perfect reasons. They act without absolute justification. This can look ordinary from the outside. A person chooses to care for their family, not because it fulfills a cosmic role, but because it feels right. Another commits to a craft, not because it will change the world, but because the process itself has value. These actions do not deny nihilism. They coexist with it. Meaning here is not a belief, but a practice. It exists only while it is being done. Modern work culture often intensifies nihilistic feelings. Many jobs feel disconnected from visible outcomes. Effort does not always lead to clear results. When work becomes abstract, meaning becomes fragile. People may feel replaceable or invisible. Nihilism feeds on this sense of interchangeability. If nothing unique is produced, value feels diluted. Some respond by seeking identity through work, hoping success will restore meaning. Others detach completely, doing the minimum required. Neither fully resolves the issue. A different approach is to shift focus from outcome to presence. The value of work can lie in attention, discipline, and contribution, even if results are imperfect. This does not romanticize labor. It simply reframes it as participation rather than proof of worth. Relationships are another area where nihilism quietly operates. When traditional expectations weaken, relationships become more flexible but also more fragile. Love is no longer guaranteed by social structure. It must be chosen and maintained. This can make relationships feel unstable, but also more honest. People stay not because they must, but because they want to. Nihilism removes obligation, but it also removes illusion. Love, then, becomes an act rather than a destiny. This can deepen intimacy, but it requires effort. Without belief in permanence, presence becomes more important. Moments together matter because they are not promised. Everyday nihilism also appears in how people relate to time. The future no longer feels like a clear destination. Long-term narratives weaken. Instead of a single life story, people live in segments. Phases, projects, seasons. This can feel disorienting, but it can also reduce pressure. Life does not need to make sense all at once. It can be approached step by step. Nihilism, in this sense, breaks the idea of a single correct path. There are many possible paths, none guaranteed. This awareness can support tolerance. When no path is absolute, judgment softens. People become less certain, but also less rigid. Of course, uncertainty is not always comfortable. Anxiety often accompanies it. When nothing is fixed, decisions feel heavier. Everyday nihilism can lead to overthinking, fear of choice, and avoidance. Some people delay decisions endlessly, hoping clarity will appear. But clarity rarely arrives on its own. Action often creates clarity, not the other way around. This is one of the practical lessons that emerges after nihilism. Waiting for meaning may result in stagnation. Acting without full certainty allows life to move. This does not mean reckless behavior. It means accepting imperfection. Everyday life does not require philosophical resolution. It requires engagement, small commitments, limited trust, temporary meaning. Nihilism does not demand that life be dramatic. It invites modesty. Instead of grand purpose, there are small reasons. Instead of eternal values, there are chosen priorities. These can change over time. This flexibility is not a weakness. It reflects reality. People grow, situations change, and meaning shifts. Nihilism simply removes the pressure to pretend otherwise. In modern culture, there is often a desire to overcome nihilism completely, to replace it with optimism or spirituality. It avoids both pain and meaning. Heidegger's response to nihilism is subtle. He does not argue against it directly. He steps around it. He shows that nihilism arises when humans forget being. When life is reduced to function, productivity, and noise. Recovering meaning requires recovering presence. This recovery is slow. It cannot be forced. It begins with noticing discomfort, anxiety, and unease instead of silencing them. In this way, nihilism becomes a doorway rather than a dead end. Heidegger believed that the modern individual stands at a crossroads. One path leads deeper into distraction, efficiency, and indifference. The other leads into uncertainty, finitude, and attentiveness. Neither path guarantees happiness. But only one allows life to be truly lived. Meaning, in Heidegger's view, is not a conclusion. It is a way of standing in the world. And nihilism, rather than destroying this possibility, quietly prepares the ground for it. The absurd, rebellion, and living without illusions. After Heidegger's quiet confrontation with everyday life and death, Albert Camus brings nihilism into a brighter but more painful light. Camus did not see nihilism as a purely philosophical problem. For him, it was deeply human and emotional. He believed that nihilism begins with a simple and universal experience, the feeling that life does not make sense, even though we desperately want it to. This tension between our desire for meaning and the silence of the universe is what Camus called the absurd. The absurd is not the world alone, and it is not the human alone. It is born from their encounter. Humans ask questions, search for reasons, hope for explanations. The universe responds with silence. This silence is not cruel or kind. It is indifferent. Camus believed that many people feel this gap without naming it. It appears in moments of exhaustion, loss, repetition, or sudden awareness. This desire is understandable, but it may miss the point. Nihilism does not need to be defeated. It needs to be understood and integrated. It acts as a reminder that certainty is fragile and that meaning requires participation. When accepted, nihilism can sharpen honesty. People stop pretending they know more than they do. This humility can improve communication, reduce conflict, and encourage learning. Everyday nihilism also influences how people face suffering. Without a higher reason, suffering may feel unjustified. This can intensify pain, but it can also reduce guilt. Pain does not need to teach a lesson or fulfill a plan. It can simply be pain. This recognition allows compassion without explanation. People can support each other without pretending that suffering is meaningful in itself. Care becomes the response, not interpretation. In the end, nihilism in everyday life is not about emptiness. It is about openness. Life is not pre-written. It unfolds through choices, habits, and attention. Meaning is not discovered once and kept forever. It appears, fades, and reappears in different forms. Nihilism clears the ground. What grows afterward depends on how people live, not on what they believe. Living forward without final answers. At the end of this journey through nihilism, philosophy does not give us a final conclusion, and that is not a failure. It is honest. Nihilism removes the promise that life will explain itself, but it does not remove life itself. People continue to live, to choose, to care, even when certainty disappears. This is the quiet truth that remains when all systems are questioned. Life does not pause while we search for meaning. It continues forward, asking us to participate whether we feel ready or not. Many people fear that without a final answer, existence becomes empty. But emptiness is not the same as openness. An empty room can feel cold, but it can also be filled. Nihilism clears the room. It takes away inherited furniture, old beliefs, and borrowed explanations. What remains is space. This space can feel uncomfortable at first. Silence often does. But silence is not nothing. It is possibility. Living after nihilism does not require confidence. It requires honesty. Honesty about uncertainty, about limits, and about the fact that no one truly knows why we are here. This honesty can be grounding. It removes the pressure to perform meaning, to pretend certainty, or to live according to scripts that no longer feel true. Without final answers, life becomes less about destination and more about direction. Direction does not need to be permanent. It can change. A person may choose one path today and another tomorrow. This flexibility is not weakness. It reflects the reality of being human in a changing world. Nihilism teaches that no path is guaranteed, but that does not mean no path is worth walking. Meaning does not need to last forever to matter now. A conversation matters even if it ends. A relationship matters even if it changes. A life matters even if it leaves no permanent mark on history. The demand for permanence is often what makes meaning feel impossible. When that demand is released, ordinary moments regain weight. Philosophy, at its best, does not tell people how to live. It sharpens awareness. Nihilism sharpens awareness by removing illusions. What remains is choice. Choice without certainty, without guarantee, and without final justification. This can feel heavy, but it can also feel real. People often ask what replaces meaning after nihilism. Nothing replaces it in the same way. Meaning becomes smaller, closer, and more fragile. It exists in attention, not belief. In showing up, not in explaining why. In choosing care even when it is not rewarded. This kind of meaning does not protect against loss or pain, but it does not depend on avoiding them either. Suffering does not disappear after nihilism. But it no longer needs to be explained or justified. Pain can be met with presence instead of answers. This shift can soften how people relate to themselves and others. Without cosmic judgment, compassion becomes simpler. People stop measuring life against impossible standards. They begin to meet life as it is. Many philosophers feared nihilism because they believed it would destroy motivation. In reality, motivation changes shape. Instead of being driven by destiny or reward, people are moved by connection, curiosity, and responsibility. Responsibility here does not mean obligation imposed from above. It means recognizing that actions affect others, and that this fact alone gives them weight. In a world without guaranteed meaning, harm becomes more serious, not less. There is no higher plan to correct it. This awareness can encourage care. Living forward without final answers requires tolerance for ambiguity. This tolerance is rare and difficult. Humans prefer clarity. But clarity is often borrowed, not earned. Nihilism removes borrowed clarity and leaves questions open. Living with open questions is a skill. It develops slowly. It involves patience, humility, and the ability to act without full understanding. Modern life rarely encourages this. Speed, certainty, and confidence are rewarded. Nihilism interrupts this rhythm. It slows things down. It asks whether speed hides fear. It asks whether confidence hides avoidance. These questions are not meant to paralyze. They are meant to ground. A person who accepts that they do not know everything may listen more. A person who accepts that life has no script may live more attentively. This attentiveness is not dramatic. It appears in how someone treats time, speaks to others, and makes decisions. Without final answers, mistakes become part of the process rather than proof of failure. Growth becomes possible because nothing is fixed. Identity becomes fluid. A person is not locked into a role or destiny. They are allowed to change. Nihilism supports this freedom by removing the idea that one correct version of life exists. Instead, there are many imperfect versions. None are guaranteed. All are temporary. This realization can reduce fear. When nothing is permanent, failure loses its absolute power. Success loses its final authority. Both become experiences rather than definitions. Living forward after nihilism does not mean rejecting all beliefs. It means holding beliefs lightly. Beliefs become tools rather than truths. They guide action but remain open to revision. This approach reduces conflict. When beliefs are not absolute, disagreement becomes less threatening. Dialogue becomes possible. In a fragmented world, this flexibility is valuable. Nihilism, often blamed for isolation, can actually support connection by removing rigid boundaries. When no one possesses ultimate truth, everyone stands on similar ground. This shared uncertainty can create quiet solidarity. People may differ in values, but they share the condition of not knowing. This shared condition does not solve problems, but it humanizes them. In the end, nihilism does not answer the question of meaning. It reframes it. Instead of asking what life means, it asks how life is lived. Instead of searching for a final explanation, it invites participation. Life is not a riddle to be solved, but a process to be engaged with. This engagement does not require optimism. It requires presence. Being here, now, without pretending that certainty will arrive later. This is not resignation. It is realism. Realism that accepts limits and still moves forward. The absence of final answers does not empty life. It strips it of illusion and leaves it unfinished. And something unfinished can still be lived. Choice by choice. Moment by moment. Without guarantees, but not without meaning.